Hi everyone, welcome to week 5. We're going to get into some Latin this week, nouns with the nominative and accusative case. All right, so we're going to go over case intro, what it is, what it means. We're going to look at the nominative and accusative, and then we're going to look at just an intro into how dictionaries work. All right, we do have case in English. You might not realize it or think about it, but the most common in English are the subjective. And if you remember from last week, we talked about the subject of a sentence and the objective case and the direct object of the sentence. Regular English nouns don't necessarily show case, but English pronouns definitely show case. And unfortunately, my arrows don't convert, so those squares should be arrows. Okay, so the subjective of he is he, the subjective of she is she, they, we, you, and it. And then into the objective, it changes, right? So it goes from he to him, it goes from she to her, it goes from they to them, we to us, and then you and it are the same. So of course, I imagine when you say me and my friend, someone in your life has at least once said to you, my friend and I, okay? Because me, of course, is the objective and cannot be used as the subject, right? So instead of me and my friend and I. On the other end of things, another common mistake is to say something like between you and I. Well, that I is the object of the preposition between, and so it really should be between you and me as an object. It should use the me form, all right? So English does show case in terms of its pronouns, not necessarily in terms of its nouns. All right, so let's see if this works. This is going to be a little new. All right, for you Star Wars fans out there. Oh, hold on. Sorry about that. I hit the wrong button. Hopefully that'll play. There we go.
That cheeseburger you do not want.
I do not want that cheeseburger.
Those fries give Yoda.
Here, have my fries.
Your drink desire you not.
The Diet Pepsi, I do want.
Want you not.
Do
Not want.
This summer, grab a Diet Pepsi and see Star Wars Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith.
All right, so independent of what you might think about the 1, 2, and 3 Star Wars, the prequel Star Wars, Yoda gives us a nice example of how even convoluted or different or changed around English word order can still be intelligible. Some of the captions were a little off. That was the auto-captioning by you. But I've sort of reproduced some of the sentences here. I used that commercial instead of clips from the movie because I wanted, 1, something relatively short, and 2, I liked how the non-Yoda character sort of repeated what he said in slightly more conventional English word order. So just by virtue of color coding, all right, so blue is our subject, all right, green is our verb, and yellow is our direct object, all right? And so with Yoda, you can see that the direct object comes first, all right? The subject comes next, and then finally the verb, the non-Yoda character, of course, puts it in slightly more conventional English word order, subject, followed by verb, followed by direct object, okay? In English, that will be the most common way of phrasing things, subject, verb, direct object. Now, Latin will actually tend to go subject, object, verb, which is not unique to Latin. There are plenty of languages that use a similar word order. But what you have to learn about Latin, the first thing to know about Latin is that it's the forms that are going to tell you what a sentence means, not necessarily the word order. So in English, in that second sentence here, right, it's the word order that tells us what the sentence means. We can understand what Yoda says, but it's not customary, it's not normal for us to understand a mixed up word order like that. All right, but in Latin, that's going to be much more common, where the word order is going to be more mixed up, but the forms and the endings, and we'll look at those endings, those are going to tell you what each word does in the sentence. All right, and then we just get another example down here. So object, all right, verb, and then subject, and the not, of course, is part of the verb. And interestingly enough, the response puts the object first but then follows by the subject, which is a little easier to understand. All right, so just some examples in English of how word order works. All right, let's look at some. Sorry, I forgot about this one. This is an example with pronouns, which again are the ones that show the case. This is by John Milton, a famous English poet. And of course, the line says, "Him followed his next mate." And the question becomes, who followed whom? And my students tend to be split on this. About half of them say that his next mate followed him, and about the other half say that he followed his next mate. And my response to them is, if John Milton is one of English's best poets, why would he make such an obvious mistake using the objective him as the subject? This phrasing, is a very Latinate phrasing, a very Latin-like phrasing, in that the him is actually the direct object, the followed, of course, is the verb, and the next mate is the subject. So the answer to the question is, his next mate followed him. What makes this very Latinate is that Milton can make his meaning clear because him is in the objective case. If you're sort of trained in Latin, if you're thinking like Latin would want you to think, you know that objective form, him, is the object no matter where it is in the sentence. If it were the subject, it would have to be he. Note, though, that this can't be done with a regular noun. I can't say his friend followed his next mate and make it clear that his next mate was following his friend. They don't change form based on their function. The pronoun, however, does change form based on its function. So that him is the object. All right, we know that because of the form. He would be the subject, and so it doesn't matter where it shows up in the sentence. It's still going to be the direct object. All right, a very un-English way of thinking, but it's a good illustration of what we're going to be learning as we get more and more into the Latin. All right, here are those endings that I was talking about. So really, we're going to be focusing on, sorry about that. All right, we're going to be focusing on the nominative and the accusative. All right, the nominative and the accusative. Nominative and accusative. Nominative and accusative. All right, so you'll learn the other ones as we go on, but we're going to begin with these two. We talked about declensions last week, in the sense that declensions are just a way of categorizing noun behavior. And so you can see that we've got the first declension nouns here, all right, and second declension nouns here, and that each of those groups, declensions, is going to have a different set of endings. All right, so start getting familiar with these endings. As I said, if you want to sort of go ahead, you can memorize all of them. If you want to kind of stay on pace, you can just memorize the nominative and the accusative, but that is what we are beginning with. All right, to the previous slide, you can see that the US is the nominative and the UM is the accusative. And R, which is on a different page from the book that I screenshotted for this, but R is an alternate nominative ending, and you can see that here is going to be ending. You can see the AE here, the nominative plural, and the OS here, the accusative plural. All right, so here is some actual Latin. And in the sentences below, both Latin and English, underline the subject, circle the direct object. All right, and you'll note that these first three are translations of each other. So numbers 1, A and B, numbers 2, A and B, numbers 3, A and B go together. All right, now the key here is those endings. If we go back, so apply that here, all right, the US is the nominative, the UM is the accusative. So dominus is the subject, puerum is the direct object. Translation, the master scares the boy, and there's that subject, object, verb structure or word order that I was saying that Latin likes to use. All right, in 2A, all right, so puer is going to be the subject, puellam, with that am, the direct object. All right, and again, the translation, the boy sees the girl. I'll leave 3A and 3B for you to do on your own, just so you can have one that matches up, and I'll do maybe a couple others as we go through. All right? All right, so if we look down at number 9, all right, this one is a little trickier. All right, note that OS is an accusative ending, and then AE is a nominative. All right, so in this particular instance, gross is the direct object, and agricolae is the subject. The farmers praise their fields. Okay, and again, it's the ending, not the word order, that's going to tell you what each word does. All right, sorry about that, little pause. So it's the ending, not the word order, that's going to tell you the meaning of each word and of the sentence as a whole. All right, and I'll do one English one, so number 16. All right, note that in number 16 we have a compound subject, the boy and the girl, and then the gifts is our direct object. All right, so a good way to practice in both Latin and English, getting used to subjects and direct objects. Remember that English will focus on word order and Latin will focus on endings. All right, so here's an all Latin exercise getting you translating. So you're going to circle the correct noun from the nouns in parentheses to complete the sentence. And when you're doing these, this won't be the only time you do these, your best bet is to translate the sentence as best you can, and then kind of figure out what's missing. So agricola, with that A ending, that's our nominative ending. So agricola is going to be the subject, all right? So the farmer doubts, dubitat, all right, some sort of accusative, right? And so if you go back to your endings, and you can check them, whether you scroll back in this video or you have them sort of on a separate screen or printed out or something, please have them handy because it's good to refer to them. But you'll see that gross is the only accusative ending, ager is nominative, and agri is nominative as well. All right, so gross is the correct ending, and then you translate the farmer. All right, doubts the fields, his fields, whatever. Okay. All right, let's do one more. Let's do number 2. All right, so aquam with that am ending. Again, that's going to be accusative. All right, so somebody, blank, loves the water. All right, and again, now tas, that's an accusative ending. Now ta, with that long mark, that macron, that line above it, that means it's not nominative, and you'll see that they are similar, these two forms, but that macron, that long mark, makes it different. So that one's not going to work. So now ta is correct. All right, and the sailor, what's the verb? Loves the water. All right. All right, so as I said, do your best to translate the sentences first and then figure out what goes blank. All right, so backing up a little bit, each noun is going to have a couple of things as you deal with it. It's going to have a declension. We talked about that. That's the group to which it belongs. It's going to have a gender. So it's going to be masculine, feminine, or neuter. All right. Number. Number refers to singular or plural. And then case, of course, at least for now, this is our nominative and accusative. All right. So if we draw a little dotted line there, the top two, declension and gender, are constant. All right, nouns will belong to a declension all the time, the same declension, and they will have a gender all the time. Some of them can change. Some occupation genders can be masculine or feminine, depending on whether it's a man or a woman, but for the most part, gender nouns will belong to one declension and will have one gender. Number and case, however, will be sort of context dependent, will depend on what the noun is doing in the sentence. So in other words, if I have agricolam, all right, so that is always going to be first declension, that is always going to be masculine. All right, this am ending means that this particular form is accusative and it is singular. Accusative, of course, is its case, and singular is its number. All right, if I have agricolae, ae, it is still first declension and masculine. Those are constant. All right, but with that ae ending, it is going to be nominative and it is going to be plural. All right, and I just know that because ae is the nominative plural ending. If you are looking at that chart, you'll see that ae appears a few times. It can be a couple different things. In a vacuum, when it's just agricolae on its own, you can't know which one of those forms it actually is. You need a sentence to give it context. All right, but for our purposes, knowing only the nominative and the accusative, agricolae will be nominative and plural. So declension and gender are going to be constant, and they have to be kind of known along with the nouns, and then number and case you'll figure out based on the sentence and the context. All right. So identify the Latin gender. All right, and then the English gender in the second blank. Latin uses what's called grammatical gender, meaning that not all things that are neuter, for instance, will be neuter gender in Latin. Most things that are masculine will be masculine. Most things that are feminine will be feminine. So, for instance, all right, for number one, wir means man. It is masculine in Latin. It is masculine in English. Puella means girl. It is feminine in Latin. It is feminine in English. All right. If I go over to number 6, littera is a letter, either a letter of the alphabet or a letter that one writes to a friend. In Latin, it is feminine. In English, of course, it is neuter. All right. So that's what I mean by grammatical gender. Littera has a grammatical gender in Latin, feminine. English doesn't really use grammatical gender, so it just kind of reverts to its neuter in English. All right, so just some practice with there. And finally, take a look at this week's summatives. All right, so we're translating sentences, all right, and this is your first real opportunity to focus on endings and to think about those nominative, accusative, and how each ending works. So if we look at number 1, both puer and puella are nominatives. That que is a conjunction meaning and. So what we have here is a compound subject, and you'll note from last week that nt ending on the verb is plural, all right, and that is because of the compound subject. So the boy and the girl work. All right. A couple things that I think I mentioned last week, but they certainly bear repeating. Make sure that your English makes sense. If your English doesn't make sense, then it cannot be correct. All right. And remember that you're not necessarily always going to figure it out the first time. If it's not making sense, go back to the beginning and kind of try again / think about the different factors again. Chances are you're missing something, that if you think about it or if you review things, you can get pretty easily. All right. All right, so in number 2, you'll note that pecuniam has an accusative ending on it. All right. In English, the first noun in the sentence is often, not always, often the subject. So in Latin, when there's a noun first, you'll want to make it the subject. Try to resist that impulse. Make sure to be looking at the endings and thinking about case. If it is nominative, correct. It is the subject, go for it. But in this case, pecuniam, with that am ending, is an accusative. All right, and so cannot be the subject. The subject is going to be contained in this verb videt and this verb tacet. All right, so he or she, you don't necessarily know. So he or she sees the money but is silent. All right, so she sees the money. Pecuniam obviously means money. All right, but is silent. All right, and I will leave the rest for you. But just watch out for some things. So, for instance, number 3, you've got that mus ending. That's going to be a different subject. And then, of course, and as, those are going to be accusative endings. All right? And then just keep going like that. All right? And for the writing, we are completing sentences with Latin endings. So these could be verbs. These could be nouns. So, for instance, the number 1, it's going to be a noun. Femina has a nominative ending, so it's going to be the subject of the verb, and as a singular subject, it's going to be jacet. All right, the T ending is that singular. If, and it's not, and this is not part of the exercise, but just by way of illustration, if it were feminae, all right, and you have to fill in the blank there, note that AE is still nominative, but now it's plural. So it would be jacent. All right, so jacet is the singular, which you need because feminine is singular. If that one had been feminae, plural, then it would have been jacent because you need the plural ending, which is nt rather than t. All right. In number 2, note that you have an accusative in rosas. You've got a t ending in habet, so that means that your subject is singular. You have a blank there, and so that's going to be an a. Puella habetne, puella rosas. Does the girl have roses? All right. All right. I'll let you do the other ones. You're basically going to be dealing with subjects and objects and verbs. That is it for this week. Thanks, and be in touch if you have any questions. All right. Have a good week. Bye-bye.